Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Real Abhinav podcast. Today I have guest Michael Cortina. He met me on LinkedIn, and we've been talking for a little while, and I just felt it was fitting because I talk a lot about brain optimization, personal health, physical health, spiritual health, and what better person to talk to, someone who's been over 20 years in the industry of helping people overcome trauma, things like guilt, things that we all experience. It could be abuse, could be many different things. So we're going to get into some of that today. Michael, I want to welcome you to the podcast. Thank you for joining me today.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Michael, let me hit you with right out of the gates. Everybody in this podcast listening world, at least on my side, is familiar with Tony Robbins. And I saw a lot of the work that you've done, and I know you help people change their lives and transform them for the better. How are you alike or different, more specifically, than Tony Robbins?
Great question. Coming out strong out of the gate. So, you know, uh, Tony Robbins, my understanding of some of Tony Robbins' background includes NLP, or neuro linguistic programming.
Right.
I too have studied neuro linguistic programming along with a host of other things. I would say I think a key differentiator, obviously Tony's this titan of the industry, right? And yet I see some things that um, cause me a little concern. Um, a lot of times, things that are being addressed are being done at conscious level activity, talking about positive thinking and talking about changing your thoughts and talking about getting rid of negative thoughts. I
Mm.
mean, these in and of themselves are not bad things. They're certainly better than the alternative, which is, beating yourself up mentally. But truly, that's only going to go so far. It's kind of like if you got a broken arm, and I come and put a bandage on it. I said, "There you go, Abhinav. You're all set." It's what, dude? Fix this. That's surface level stuff. And so people find themselves in this loop, and this is what I'm passionate about: getting things cleared up for people, so that they can move on with their lives. So many people get caught in this self help um, like vortex that they can't
Hmm.
get.
Oh, yeah, it's a drug in itself.
Yeah, and if you have to continue to challenge your thoughts, your negative thoughts that show up, and replace them, that could get exhausting over time, and it's not curative. So I think a key differentiator is that when I'm working with people, I'm working at a much substantially deeper level, subconscious level of mine, to get things resolved and going in a different direction there, such that they don't need to even deal with um, the bandages, because we're getting right to the true source and doing healing there, if that makes sense.
Right. I think one thing you said that stuck out to me is instead of just replacing your thoughts with positive ones, which is a tactic that, yeah, sure, it works, but it's quite exhausting because it's laborious. You have to continually do it. So to me, that kind of speaks to the fact that you could fall into the trap of seeing that, wow, my thoughts aren't perfect, or they keep coming up and have to keep having to work on them. I would say, in my perspective, or at least in my experience, is that it's better to just see that your thoughts are not always going to be positive, and they're going to be negative ones, and they're going to be memories that come up that are not yours, that maybe aren't even your own emphasized, like, experience. It could be something that you grew up with in your family household, or something that had culmination of all this unconscious data that we gather throughout our existence, and we don't really control when it kind of percolates its way up to our thought process. So why not accept all of your thinking, and then see, okay, I see all of my thinking. Some of it's good, some of it's not so good. And then notice that trend. How much of that is of my thinking, at least in my experience, is negative versus, how much of it is like in a good, positive, healthy state, which makes me move forward. You know,
That's a phenomenal point. And I was literally talking to somebody this morning, somebody I was working with this morning, about
yeah.
this. Exactly. That the thoughts themselves, in and of themselves, are not problematic. If you think about what the brain is designed to do, I
Hmm.
mean, for a minute, let's get a brain based understanding of what's going on. The brain is designed to bring into our awareness things that are dangerous, so that we avoid them,
Right.
that are dangerous or negative, so that we avoid them. It's also designed to bring in things to our awareness that are pleasurable, so that we pursue them. That food looks really good. That's in line, with the mission of me continuing to live another day.
Mm.
So I'll eat that really good, piece
Pizza,
of,
whatever.
and then all of a sudden, as I'm going to get that piece of food, I see three pit bulls running at me, foaming at the mouth, looking like they haven't eaten in 3 weeks, looking like they want to make lunch out of me. How much of a priority do you think my brain is going to make that slice of pizza anymore?
Right. Your
Now,
appetite probably disappears. You run.
that's it. And so our brain, what I tell people is your brain is going to give you negative thoughts. That's what it does. That what the game changer is, people then start judging themselves, in part because a lot of what they hear in the self-help movements, shouldn't have these thoughts, or you got to, no, it's natural, it's normal that the brain gives you negative thoughts. When you release the judgment associated with those thoughts, or you don't beat up on yourself for having a negative thought, that's incredibly freeing, and I would contend much more accurate to what's going on with the hardware.
Yeah, because it's like you shouldn't be down on yourself just because you had an experience come up or a thought or emotion come up. One thing that I've been reminding myself more of in the last 2 weeks is whatever feelings come up in me are not a statement of who I am. Whatever emotions come up in me are not a statement of who I am. Because just because I feel angry or I feel, not motivated or stressed out or whatever, that doesn't mean I am that person. I'm a stressed out, angry person, right? That's why I always kind of, when it comes to labeling, because we have to obviously use words to communicate, I always go with I am peace and love, but I just forgot every time that I'm not in a positive state, I'm peace and love. I'm not angry. I'm not this stressed out person, because you always have to kind of give yourself some direction. Why do I do that? Sometimes people ask me, that's weird. I don't understand why you say you're peace and love, or, talk about it. So simply for me is like, if your mind is in a peaceful state, in a joyful, loving state, you're just going to be way more open to experiencing things that come up in life, versus if you're in sort of this angry, closed off, traumatic state, perhaps, if it keeps reliving yourself, you're just not going to move forward in life with the full potential. So for me, it's more of like adjusting. You have to give yourself a target, so to speak, right? Like something that your mind is kind of keeping on its radar as you're navigating through your day to day. At the lowest level, what would you say that is in your experience working with so many different people and dealing with trauma? Like, what were some of the common things or themes perhaps that come up, more times than not? And, is there anything you can speak to about that, like the commonality of what you've seen across many different years of working on this?
Under the umbrella of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a pretty it's an umbrella that casts a far wide-reaching shadow. I have seen under the umbrella of trauma everything from, it's funny because I'll do when I do trainings and I do, master classes and so forth, I am a minimalist on PowerPoint, almost none.
Yeah.
But I used to work for an organization, and I would train all the new clinical people that were coming in, the therapists and so forth. And I did have one slide in there, a PowerPoint slide, that listed all sorts of examples of trauma, everything from physical abuse, sexual abuse, rape, wartime trauma, car accidents. And I would say this to people. I would say, the last bullet point on this slide is the only thing keeping this slide alive in this presentation. I'll share what that was in a moment. But here's what I would say. I would say somebody comes in and they tell me they are bothered, really upset by the one-time comment that their fourth grade teacher made to them. Mind you, they're 40 years old now. The one-time comment their fourth grade teacher made to them, and it still really pushes emotional buttons and causes a lot of dis-ease. And my response to that person is this: oh, get over it, dude. You kidding me? I just talked to somebody who got incested for the last 7 years by her own father. Get a grip. No, of course I don't say that. And it's the last bullet point that allows me to not say that. And that last bullet point is this: traumatic events are individually defined.
Mm.
So I'm not so concerned what the person has been through. If it's bothering them here and now in the present day, I am completely invested in getting it resolved so it no longer bothers them. Looking through the lens of traumatic events are individually defined does a beautiful thing for you. You hear a lot of people talk about there's too much judgment in this world. If you look through that lens, it truly removes even the capacity to have judgment. You then connect with somebody in an absolute and true judgment free zone because I'm not so concerned whether they were raped, whether it was domestic violence, whether they got in a car accident, whether it was the fourth grade teacher. There's no judgment. If it's bothering you, that's what your brain is doing, and I'm interested in getting that resolved.
I love that. So you're basically saying that there's no blanket answer for the trauma that you've seen. You've seen a variety of different things, and you obviously have to deal with them at a case by case basis because what's real to somebody is may not be as traumatic or real to somebody else, and that's fair, and that's a fair point because everybody experiences life through their own perspective, their own lens, through their own body, their own emotions, and their everything else. So each of us see the same life with different viewpoints, and what we take away from it and what we gather is really unique to ourselves. Now, if we tend to go into a corner where we're now like hating life and the world around us because of the things that we've processed out of that information or the way we've chosen to listen to our mind and the thoughts, that can become a problem, right? Like for me, this is a good segue to talk a little bit about social media. Like how much data unconsciously are you absorbing continuously scrolling through any platform today? Name your favorite one. So it's like how much of that stays with you even when you're not looking at a screen or you're just walking around but you're still thinking about something somebody said online or how much engagement you got or didn't get, and kind of like what has been your experience in the recent years of social media, and the kind of the trauma that's being created by that.
Yeah, and if I may just say one more thing about the last piece, and then
Sure.
say that, and that is, you're right. It's everybody's brain is different. So let's say I get in a car accident today, I get T-boned, and I'm freaked out. I'm like, I don't want to see the car keys. I'm not driving again. I'm certainly not going down that street anymore. Forget it. And you get in a car accident, you get T-boned, exact same accident. You
Hmm.
get and before you could blink your eyes, you're over at Enterprise Rent a Car, like, give me the keys, give me the keys. You want to get on the road. What's the difference? We both got T-boned.
Hmm.
The only difference is the way that my brain processed it. The neural pathways laid it down as a traumatic event. Your brain, not so much. So there's absolutely differences in how our brains process information. And once more, no judgment with that. It just is what it is. The brain's an organ.
Yeah. Well, before we move on to the social media question, I guess I would ask, have you noticed that there is a trend in when people say like if they feel things more aggressively than maybe than other people, like I don't know if aggressively is the right word, but meaning if someone tends to, I can speak for myself, like I know I'm more neurotic than not, right? Like I have a high level of neuroticism in my own kind of thinking. I have lots of negative thoughts. I tend to wake up in the morning and not be like rightly in the positive state. I have to do certain things to get myself going, but that's just something that I've identified of myself, and now I have a action plan for it daily. It starts with morning gratitude. I hug my wife, and generally she'll ask me, what are you grateful for today? And a lot of times I don't want to say because like, a stupid question to ask in the morning. But at the same time, as much as I don't want to say it, giving a few answers to that really gets me to shift from whatever half plugged in dream state that I've been in to like this real conscious space that I'm now waking up into, and then gets me moving on with my day, and then I start with, okay, I want to make sure I get some exercise in. So I'll go ride my bike for 20 minutes. And I'm going to sit down and meditate, write down a few thoughts that come to mind, get on with my day. Like that to me is sort of my way of charging myself up for success in the morning. But I'm curious, like, have you noticed people are generally like on one side of the spectrum or the other, or is it even possible to shift someone completely to like not be that way? Like like if I'm a high in neuroticism, can is that a trait that I can actually be changed over time in your experience, or is that something that like is kind of like you just have to learn to live with it, and find a way around it? Like what would you say as a professional?
First of all, I love the way, what a beautiful way to start your morning. And even if in the moment it's like I'm trying to wipe the sleep out of my eye and you're asking me, I'm grateful. But man, what a beautiful way. Gratitude's a superpower. Um, awesome. Yay for you guys. Um, Yeah, I think that there is tremendous capacity for change. What this thing can do is extraordinary. Um, we have our sort of certain personalities, and maybe someone is a little more high energy than someone else. Maybe someone is a little more introverted or extroverted or what have you. We have sort of these personality components to us, and yet at the same time, I think there is absolute potential to get things going in a different direction, a direction that's more productive and desirable, if that be the case, if someone's interested in that. A really sort of bizarre example, but this is just what my brain showed me, is you take somebody, you take some of the best actors and actresses in the world, right? And they portray this character and they do it so convincingly
Hmm.
that you believe that that's who they are, right? And you talk to them as a person and they're the furthest thing in the world from that. Well, you better believe there's some brain chemistry stuff going on as they're accessing and harnessing to portray that character. And if that's the case, and some people will say, oh, they're just acting. No, no, hook them up and you'll see brain chemistry changes happening. Actually, they've done that. They've done that. When actors are professional actors are portraying anger, you'll see the brain structures light up. When they're portraying depression, so that um, is pretty powerful evidence of the process of neuroplasticity and how we behave throughout the day.
Hmm.
So I think it can absolutely be done.
I actually know a little bit about neuroplasticity. I learned about it about 2017, I want to say. I went through a phase of, getting depressed. I think I was mentioning that to you last time when we spoke. And one of the things that I learned about was neuroplasticity, about the ability for you to actually change the structures of your brain, like the synapses, I think is more accurately. I'm not an anatomy person, by the way. I know more about muscles than I know about like brain stuff, because from bodybuilding I could probably name all the muscles on the body much easier, just because I used to stare at myself all the time. um, so like what I learned about neuroplasticity really though was that you really can change your mind, but you got to be consistent with it. It's like you're breaking patterns, you're breaking your own conditioned behavior. So every time I would have a negative thought about like this looming fear of doom, I would write down, well, what's the alternative, and how do I know that that's not the actuality? Kind of asking yourself the questions that would unravel that state, so I can go back to being productive again, or being back to being calm again. And then it brings up a kind of this the reasoning behind why I think I even got into some of those states is contemplating like life in itself can be very, very challenging. I think every human being at some point in their life has to figure out, why are they here? What are they here for? Why do they even exist? And if you haven't gotten to that point, don't worry, it's coming for you at some point in your life. It might be when you're 60. Who you never know. Everybody has it at different stages in their life, and that was, I had it thankfully young, at an early age, where I didn't have other things that were holding me down anymore. I had somewhat, financially gained my own independence, and now after that point, you start to realize, well, that game is really, really long, but how do I want to stay motivated to play that game for the long run? So for me, like kind of these things around changing my beliefs and changing what I thought about continuously had to come into place. And honestly, yeah, meditation was my savior in that sense. First time you sit down to meditate, most people say, I can't do it. I just can't do it. I'm too distracted. I would say that's exactly the point. It's there to show you how compulsive you actually are, and then start that acceptance process. Wow, I can't sit down for 10 minutes without like wanting to be like, I gotta pee, I gotta eat. Oh, I gotta answer that email. I gotta get back to this guy. 10 minutes? You can't sit down, sit still. I've felt that way. And I know how other people feel now. Now I can sit down for 30, 45 minutes without moving. And I can be totally fine. I'd get up and I'll be like so much more calmer. But I guess where I'm getting to this is like that in me brought introspection as a skill set, which I believe is very important. I think everybody needs to learn how to question their own thoughts and play that sort of third person narrative. Just because a thought comes up doesn't mean I automatically have to assume that this is a real thing that I have to then do. You know, to even see that space of like thinking is happening within me, just like breathing and my heartbeat and my vision and my hearing. All these operations are continuously flowing. You're not controlling them. Same as the thought process that comes up. And it's really just that space you create by meditating or sitting sat down and doing, and that was kind of my solution to getting out of these states is like, I'm not the state, I'm not the feeling, I'm definitely not the emotion that I'm feeling. I'm beyond that. I am the one experiencing it. So that
Yeah.
place, that quiet place within me is really what connecting myself to that on a daily basis, or and it's, I think that was kind of like, and it still is and will continue to be my way of reprogramming myself in that sense, like my personality. That's kind of my takeaway. I mean, from your professional experience, like what do you think about all that? Is it just hocus pocus in your mind view, or what do you think?
No, you're really on point. So much of this is really, for example, when you said I experienced emotions, but I am not that. I'm so much more than that. That is so on point. And people that get in, they get stuck. They get stuck. You'll hear language. If you listen for it, you'll hear language that's reflective of, not intentionally, but it happens. So I can't tell you how many people I've met who maybe they're coming to me for my services, and maybe they're dealing with, let's just say anxiety. I could pick anything,
They're
but
very common, yeah.
yeah. And so they say, I'm anxious. And I reach up my hand and I say, hi, anxious, nice to meet you. No,
Right.
I don't say that, but you get it, right? No, you're not anxious. And way back in the day, I mean, this goes back decades, where I would tell people, you're not bipolar, you're not schizophrenic, you're a person with schizophrenia, you're a person with bipolar, you're not a diabetic, you're a person who has diabetes.
Hmm.
When you identify with the pathology, it strengthens the pathology, weakens the possibility of getting out of it and shifting and moving. So, um, from a languaging standpoint, language is powerful. These are, you're not your emotions, you're not this diagnosis, you're not. I mean, there would be so much relevance in this for the medical profession. You go to the doctor, they're just loading you up with this pathology based language. It's like, no, man, we're people. We're people
Yeah.
for a person who has this. And emotions, you know, I describe them like a wave, like an ocean wave. So they start to come on. At some point, they crest, they start to hit a peak, and then they subside.
Hmm.
No one is constantly anxious, constantly euphoric, constantly jacked up, constantly joyful, constantly pissed off. So emotions are like a wave, right? They're not going to last. They come, they build, and they go.
I call them like passing clouds. Same difference. Like nothing lasts forever. Whatever state you're in now, this too shall pass. That old saying, right? It's surprisingly useful when you're in a bad state. It's not something you really want to entertain when you're in a positive state, like when you're having lots of fun, you're like, I don't want this to end. I want this to last forever. I think that's when you're growing up from a child to becoming an adult. I think a lot of that is accepting that, those things don't last forever, the good ones. And then, of course, once you start working and whatnot, you start to realize, oh, I got to pay taxes, I got to pay my rent, I got to do all these other things. And you're like, wow, life sucks. Like, nobody prepared me for this because school doesn't prepare you for any of that. Honestly,
Yeah.
my biggest challenge is like, why the hell wasn't I taught how to do any of these things that we're talking about in school? Where's the education really taking us? But I won't go on that tangent. What I will go on is seeing that you are not the thoughts. How important is that in kind of self therapy? Like, do you believe in such a thing? Like, is there such a thing as curing your own self by introspecting? Like, what would you say? Obviously, you're a professional that talks to people, and if they're coming to you, then they might not have quite yet figured out that that's something that they have access to, and you maybe can help them show that. But to the general, sense of people, if they want to start their journey on getting better, like, do you think there is such a thing as self therapy?
Sure, I do. I think there are many lifestyle and habits. Well, lifestyle is nothing more than merely a collection of habits.
Mm.
There are many behaviors and habits and lifestyle factors and self therapy things we can do that would be tremendously beneficial for our well being, physical, emotional well being. I think there's a point where some of it is, it's not going to do it, and you're going to have to, um, let's, we were talking about trauma earlier. Let's stick with that example then. So a trauma, what happens is there's an experience that happens to the person, or they experience something, right? It happens in experiential format.
Mm-hmm.
That experiential format then like slams into the brain and leaves a lasting mark. Now, a person can self-talk themselves for the next 20 years, and that thing ain't going away.
Mm.
It's going to take um, the collaboration in an experiential format, because that's how the thing got encoded, to get that thing recoded. And furthermore, it's going to take an experiential process of getting that thing to recode in such a way that the deepest parts of the brain, the subconscious mind, is what's accessed. None of this talking therapy stuff is going to do it. None of the self-help, self-therapy stuff is going to do it. 99% of that is conscious level.
Mm.
This thing isn't at conscious level. People aren't choosing to feel lousy conscious.
Right.
If they were choosing to feel lousy, they would just simply say, I'm going to choose to not feel lousy. And then they wouldn't feel lousy anymore.
Yeah, if it was that easy, right?
Yeah. And everybody would be feeling great. And I'd have to go be an accountant or an engineer or something.
That's funny.
But it doesn't so much work that way, right? I mean, it's not a problem. It's not a function of intelligence, of conscious. And as such, it requires a much a deeper process experientially to get that to completely resolve. Doesn't mean there's not value in doing, a lot of these techniques. There's certainly tons of value in all the lifestyle stuff, exercise, sleep, nutrition, meditation, all great stuff, and all stuff that will absolutely help you on your path. There's just going to be some things that folks encounter that they could do all that until the cows come home, and it's just not going to get it done.
So how would you say we get lasting change or go to the subconscious level? What's the barrier of entry to that?
Yeah, that's you. Barrier to entry. Stigma is the barrier to entry. That's an area not to be dabbled with lightly. It is extremely profound and powerful and impactful. And I would not leave that to self. I would not leave that to somebody who doesn't have extensive experience in doing that level of work. And I liken it to this. If you had something going on with your heart, you're not going to go to see the podiatrist.
Mm.
You're going to see the cardiologist. If you have something going on with arthritis, you're going to see the rheumatologist. If you have something with your foot, you're going to go see the podiatrist. You're going to see the specialist. Why in the world, and I'm passionate about this, you can argue there's a little bit of a bias, whether there is or isn't. I think the point's is pretty relevant, will resonate. Why in the world would you think it's okay to dabble around with the captain of the ship, the most priceless organ, the brain?
Mm.
Well, I'll see the specialist for my liver and my gallbladder and my appendix, but when it comes to the brain, no, I got this. Let me do it. Are you kidding me? It's nothing to be played around with. So the barrier to entry, hope that makes sense. The barrier to entry, I would argue then, is stigma. Is stigma that when people are saying stigma and ego.
Yeah, I was going to say it's very much of an ego play, because you don't want somebody to say, oh, there's something wrong with you, and especially in a mental state, because a lot of times, speaking to what we were talking about earlier, like you don't control your listening or your breathing or your vision or the blood moving through your body. All of those things, when we have a disease or something happens, when if you're diabetic, for example, like you can offload that as to a third party projection, like, yeah, it's in my body, but it's not in my head, right? But the moment it comes to like, hey, your personality or your ego is the issue here, it's actually what you believe yourself to be is the issue, and we need to talk about that. I think it's a place where, not everyone's willing to go there. And if they aren't, then yeah, you really can't change them. But if they are, they're open to it. Yeah, right. Go ahead. You were going to say something.
Excuse me. And to your point, that is hopefully you can edit out my hacking.
Well, that's okay. I leave it raw in the sometimes too. It's all good. People need to see that we're real human beings. We're not polished
I'm good.
projects here.
Uh, but to that point, that's I end every one of my videos on LinkedIn. Optimize your brain, optimize your life. We talk about the brain a lot. That's very intentional and very deliberate.
Yeah.
The reason why, well, there's a couple of reasons why, but in this context, the reason why is the brain is an organ. And if I can get that message out, like from the top of the world, I would love to. The brain is an organ, just like your heart can malfunction, your gallbladder can malfunction,
Mm,
lungs can malfunction. Your brain can experience dis-ease. It can malfunction. It's an organ, it's biology. Why wouldn't that be the case? And if you look through that lens, if you dare yourself to look through that lens, maybe we could start destroying this wall, smashing this wall is what I want to do, of stigma. Man, there's no stigma with it. Stigma and ego are huge barriers to this, but if we can get the understanding that it's an organ,
right.
then just like any other organ, it could be optimized, it could be strengthened, which is what I'm all about, and it can also experience dis-ease, malfunction. No shame in it, man.
No, I agree with you 100% because a large part of what I post about and why I wanted to do any of this is to squash the tabooness about mental health. Like, it's not a problem that we hide from anymore, right? Like, I got into physical health, like bodybuilding and all, and I try to, push myself to the extremes of that so I can learn as much as I could about it. And I realized, like, even in that endeavor, when we try to set out to do something physical or, something that's very much going to require all of your, time and attention, you start to see that how much of that is actually just in your mind, right? It's not my body saying I can't do this anymore. Yeah, there's a point of failure where it's just like the muscle will just give out, like your grip will fail. That happens, but not always. A lot of times it's, oh, this hurts, this sucks so bad. So a lot of times what happened with me working out is I was always like closing my eyes or wearing like a hoodie or just keeping my headphones on and really going into my body and seeing like what I'm trying to do and how does that translate into what's actually happening in front of me and what I'm thinking about. A lot of that is just it's an active meditation in that sense. Before I knew anything about meditation, I started to realize this after the fact that doing something physical, a lot of times people confuse like, oh, it's good for training my body. I didn't realize this until I stopped training after I finished competing for a while. I noticed that my physical activity went down so much that it started to really affect my mental health, which in part led to me, getting more and more contemplative and then depressed because you being really smart, a lot of us have so much more information than we ever had before. We think we know a lot and we think that we can cure everything because we know a lot and we can find an answer on Google 10 seconds. I can Google something and find an answer, right? So we think that we have everything. And yes, you do. But at the same time, there's certain things that you can't get away from if you don't practice your way out of them. Like there are certain procedures you have to follow. Like for me, like I was talking about earlier, the meditation every day, the gratitude, the working out, the exercising, all of those things, if I don't do them for a few days, I start to notice a huge decline in my performance, in my general well-being. Now, somebody could say, well, that just means you're addicted to that too. Maybe. But at the same time, I'm also realizing that the benefit that I get from doing that is so much more than if I didn't. I'd rather be addicted to that, than not doing it. So it's an interesting place. And why does it sit so close to me is, yeah, for the last, I'm part of the generation that, for the last 10 years or so, let's go back even, Facebook. And when I was in high school, that's when Facebook came out. But social media has grown up so much and it's such an integral part of our lives. I mean, you and I met off of LinkedIn. I would have never known you existed without it. So it's not that it's all bad. It's just, it has its consequences. It has a certain level of control to your psyche. Like it's programmed to do so. It's programmed to keep your attention, to keep you on there longer, to keep you hooked, so you continue to be on the platform, right? I'm curious, like, what have you noticed in terms of like the trauma that's being created in people's lives from being on social media? And kind of like, I feel like guilt is also involved in there because you sometimes see like, oh man, my life, is so bad, or like, somebody else's life is so good. You feel guilty about what you have, maybe, or the lack thereof, perhaps. I don't even know if that's guilt would be the right word for it, but it's almost like you're not appreciative at all of what you have because you see everybody else and not you.
There you go. There it is. Yeah, absolutely. So what I've seen a lot of is what I'll call comparative identity, and the way that it gets applied is diluted. So what happens is people will go on and they'll see, everybody's posting like, hey, I'm on the boats with the tropical drink, and hey, look at I'm with this, movie star, or hey, I'm all these great things, and they're giving you snapshots, they're
Mm.
giving highlights of what is truly the highlights of their life, right? You're getting the highlight reel. It's like it's like watching baseball highlights, and every hit is a grand slam, and everything is a reverse slam dunk. You're getting the highlights, and what happens is as people are watching this, they're scrolling through while they're sitting on their couch
Or the
um,
toilet.
or the toilet. It's raining outside, and they're like, "Well, damn, why isn't my life like this? This sucks. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? How come I don't have this?" Whether that's a material thing or just that experience.
Right.
And so there starts to be this comparison game that starts to develop as a result of social media and what's being posted out there and all these positive, wonderful things. And then, no one's posting, they got a new puppy. They're trying to potty train the thing. The thing's got to take a leak at 5 in the morning, and it's freezing and raining out in Chicago here, maybe not in San Diego. You take January in Chicago, and you're outside with like an umbrella with the dog at 5 in the morning, and you're like, man, life sucks.
Yeah.
And then you go look at your feed, and someone's like on a tropical island. You know, they're not posting that. Why aren't they posting when their dog's taking a poop and it's 5 in the morning and it's
Because
raining?
it wouldn't get that kind of attention, right?
There you go. And so there's a lot of impact that it's having, and this is usually the way it play the comparison game. You always come up short.
Yeah, there's always going to be, and the same thing happened with bodybuilding. I learned that, right? Like, because there's always going to be someone bigger than you. There's always going to be. You're not going to be the biggest person. And so I really like took that on earlier in my life to realize like I can only compare myself to me and like the progress that I'm making and the way I looked, a week, 2 weeks, a month ago versus the way I'm looking now, and really just comparing yourself to who you were yesterday, not who someone else is today, is more elegantly put by Jordan Peterson in his book 12 Rules for Life. Um, and I feel like that's something that we just can't get enough of. So a lot of the times when I'm talking about this, what social media is about, like just introspecting, seeing yourself for who you are, and not necessarily comparing it to everybody else and what they've got going on. But have you noticed in the last 10 years or so in your industry, like more and more people because of social media are starting to come up with these problems? Like, because I personally predict this is not going to be the end of it like this right now, 2020. I think from 2020 and beyond right now, this problem is going to become way, way bigger just because we didn't come with an instruction manual how to use social media effectively. This was just dropped on the public. Do what you will as you may. Everyone's got a pocket computer walking around, but human beings are just as dumb as they were in the 80s or 90s, I would argue, right? Like, just because there's technology doesn't mean automatically all human beings have become smarter and more effective. That's the hope over time that the tools that we've created, the man has created, is going to help us be better humans. But we haven't gotten to that actualization state yet, or that ROI fully. Some have. I can't speak for everyone. Some have. But for the large majority of us, I feel like that's a problem that we're going to have to keep continuing to face as things get more and more crazy. Thinking about current state of affairs, people post on social media and all of a sudden it could be misinformation that gets massively distributed. And think about the trauma that creates in someone else's life. Like, I can imagine my parents, they're in their 60s, they're still looking at these phones. They don't have perhaps enough knowledge to understand, is this doctored, or is this the real truth, or is this coming from a credible source? And now think about the stress that causes in their life. As an older person, you're like, wow, the world's falling apart, man. I'm not even going to be able to retire. or whatever it is, you know. So I'm curious, have you noticed a huge trend on, you know, kind of the social media side and that causing more stress and like, you know, maybe depression in people's lives?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and in some instances, like you're talking about, unnecessarily, it's junk data, junk info. But yes, I mean, when they first came out with the slot machine,
Hmm.
what they did, well, let's go back even further. If you go way back, uh, and under the umbrella of the behavioral school of therapy, behaviorism, there was a fellow by the name of B.F. Skinner.
Okay.
He devised what was called the Skinner box, and they would put these mice in there, and they had so if the mouse tapped on a bar, it got a pellet of food every time it tapped on the bar. In the next box, when the mouse tapped on the bar, it never got a pellet of food. And then the next box over, every time the mouse tapped on the bar, sometimes it would get a pellet of food after 3 taps, sometimes after 1 tap, sometimes after 7 taps, sometimes after 17 taps.
Hmm.
And what they figured out was the most reinforcing or addicting reinforcement schedule was the random one. The mouse who got a pellet every single time it tapped, sooner or
It's
later,
too easy of a game.
too easy and you're satiated, the stomach has had enough. The one who never gets anything learned helplessness, why bother? This other one, I might get it, I might not get it.
Hmm.
When they came out with the slot machines, they rigged those slot machines on payout schedules, just like that Skinner mouse. So
Wow, that's crazy.
was they create, talk about a gambling addiction. They created the most reinforcing schedule based on behavioralism out of psychology for these mice to create a bunch of human mice so that they keep putting the money in the slot machine. Maybe I'm going to get it this time. Maybe I'll get it this time. Um, I don't think for 1 second that there's not some of that at play with the social media stuff.
Oh yeah, I think the people who made Facebook, one of the founders, his name was Chamanth. I don't think he was a founder, but he came on later. He has openly talked about this. He's like, we created a monster. We knew what we were doing. We thought that we wouldn't get into this pickle, like things wouldn't be as bad, but they're horrible. People are addicted. I've
Yeah.
seen people literally, including myself, I've observed myself, I'm better at this now, where I would be like, oh, I got to do this thing, but I'll open my phone and I'll automatically be on a social media app and not doing the thing that I was opening my phone for because that conditioned behavior is already so hardwired into me that I automatically know 2 taps here and I'm there, you know, and how much of that is really like creating a monster of trouble in the future, right? Like, because we don't have a real way of dealing with it yet. And this is kind of the frontier, you know, why I wanted to talk to someone like you.
So absolutely. So you have that going on, right? You have this whole addictive component, like the people in the slot machines from back in the day, which were like the mice back in the B.F. Skinner days.
Mm.
The whole addiction piece and the way the whole thing is structurally set up and designed to create that. You have comparative identity. So the people are saying, oh, my life's not like that. That sucks. Um, and then you mentioned earlier, a little while back, about the unconscious, the subconscious, and some of the stuff getting in. Some of the things that the subconscious is really responsive to are things like imagery, symbols, metaphors,
Mm.
a number of these things. And as you scroll through the visual stimulation, um, and then I mean, again, if you go, I'm dating myself a little bit, but if you go back before Facebook, before social media days, what they would talk about the impact of the women on the Cosmo covers, right?
Mm.
Everybody's airbrushed and they look perfect. And so you get that visual, boom, it's hitting your subconscious. That's how
Right.
women, I'm a woman. Why don't I look like that? Man, she's beautiful. So, this goes way back to marketing, really. And so that's playing out at high speed, record levels by the consumption of social media. You don't just have to be in your grocery aisle line to get an image of the scantily clad, model on the cover to get a subconscious message. And now it's, to your point, right there at our fingertips, and we're bombarded with it. So Yes, don't for a minute believe, to your listeners, don't for a minute believe that this isn't hitting your subconscious and having some impact. It is.
What do you feel about, or what do you have to say about the fact that there are people out there that are in the marketing world who know what you know, who know the vulnerabilities of human beings, but then choose to exploit them to get, more sales? Obviously to me, I want to make money, but I don't want to hurt people while I do it. But that's my moral compass. That's my own consciousness telling me that's not good. But how do you feel about that? And, is that part of the driving factor or the force into why you're doing what you're doing?
I don't know if that was the origin of the force of what I'm doing, but it certainly plays out. Um, I don't, every person has to look at themselves in the mirror at the end of the night, right? You have to walk in your shoes, you have to live in your skin. Um, I don't pretend to be, nor would I want to be the business police or the media police. I know for me personally, it's not how I get down. It's not what I would do. It's not the person I would want to look at in the mirror at the end of the day. I mean, I'll tell you, there's sometimes people come to me for my services, and if it's not a good fit, I'll refer them out, or
Hmm.
I'll deliberately I kind of screen people. It's like I'm not interested in your money. Sure, I want to make money. We're all here. We want to make a living. We want to provide for ourselves and our families, and I fall into that category too, for sure. But it doesn't drive me. It doesn't. I'm not mindless about it. If someone's not a good fit for my services, I remember I had somebody who told me that they just want to. I saw something that I could resolve quickly for this person in one visit, and they told me, well, they want to just spend time and really mull things over and explore why and process this and be with you for, it would have been months and years the way they were talking about it. I'm like, I'm sorry, that's not the work that I do. I could recommend you to somebody. I'm not interested in taking your money. I want to get results. I want to get outcome. So I don't know, man. It's a great question. I don't know that I have a straight answer for how
Well, that's
people.
okay. I just wanted to see where your thought process was. I could take it another way, which is like, how does dealing with people that have quote unquote issues, and I don't really want to call that as a negative label because we all have things. We're none of us is perfect, but how does that affect Michael? Like, hearing people and sort of these crazy things that people go through, it's kind of unbelievable. Now, how does
Yeah.
that affect you? Because I know me, I'm a very emotional, I'm very empathetic, but I tend to see that that's a double edged sword. Because I'm so empathetic, I tend to take on some of those emotions and they carry with me sometimes forward. I'm having to realize that that's a real problem, that I have to make sure I'm aware of and I keep myself in check and grounded. So, how has, that been for you? You've been doing it for so long and you've seen so much. Like, are you at just obviously maybe at a state now that you were when you were starting, but or a better state, so to speak. But like, are you, how are you dealing with all this? How do you deal with hearing people's just shit all the time, man?
So years ago, it used to be a little more difficult, but I learned something. I've been on a lifelong quest to provide much more effective, efficient, uplifting, energizing, transformative processes for people. And so I've continued to stay a student. And when I didn't like what I was already taught, I went and became a student somewhere else.
Mm.
And then when I didn't like that, I became a student, or I liked that, but I wanted to add on. I became a student somewhere else. And what I've learned is there's whole ways of being now that when I'm with somebody, their stuff doesn't get in.
Mm.
Now, in the old traditional way of practicing, where you're like, kind of using empathy all the time, that stuff gets in and you feel like you got hit with a sledgehammer, at the end of the day. And it is impactful. And it is why so many people in the therapy profession burn out. But I've learned different ways, higher order listening. I've learned how to take in information on different levels. I've learned a lot of really cool and interesting stuff. Just to be frank, man, it excites me. I'm not trying to sound. I mean, it excites me, um, and the impact of it is it doesn't impact me in that way at all, which means I'm more resourceful, energized, and available for the person I'm serving. It's been awesome. And the other thing I'll say about that is this, and this, I don't know if I've talked about this yet. You're going to get this. I don't know if I was ready to go there yet. I don't think I've done a video on this yet.
Well, now time, no better time than now, right now, Michael.
Let's go for it, man. Here's the thing. You hear tons and tons and tons of things about empathy and how valuable empathy is. And in my profession, that gets pounded into your head about empathy. I think the whole notion is whacked. And I'm going to tell you that, first of all, let's just get operationally defined on the same page. Empathy is really experiencing, even if just a sliver, what someone else has experienced. Metaphorically, walking a mile in their shoes, seeing their eyes, getting a sense of what they might have been through. Now, when you're talking people who've been through a lot of horror and a lot of tough stuff, they're talking about stuff that's suitable for a Stephen King movie as far as what they've been through. I'm doing what I've been trained to do, which is to be real empathic. By the way, why the hell would I ever want to do that? Well, because if I'm empathy, then I really understand what they've been through as much as I can. And, well, if I do that, then I can start to have a therapeutic relationship with them. So, well, if we have a therapeutic relationship, then I can start to help them. Now I get how we do
It's
it.
like two steps to get to the end results.
There you go. Not only is it inefficient, but here's what happens. They're talking with all sorts of sensory detail about the horror they've been through. I'm being empathic, and before you know it, I'm over here with them feeling
You're on the same train suffering.
same suffering. And from here, I'm supposed to help them out of the abyss.
Yeah.
Um, and the wrong person just got hypnotized. So what I've learned instead is I'm going to stay over here in the light. Thank you very much. I'm going to use these other processes, higher level processes that I've learned to really develop a strong rapport with you, connection with you, collaboration with you. That can be used like a magnet to pull you over into the light with me. And isn't this where we want you anyway?
Hmm.
And in doing so, I don't take on all that heaviness. The primary beneficiary of that is the person that I'm serving because I'm not trying to help them from the same ditch that they're in. I'm seeing clear, I'm fully resourced, fully energized. I got this. And I see how I'm going to get you into the light with me. Secondary beneficiary is me. I got more energy. I got more in the tank to serve more people or to use in my personal life, however I want to do it. So um, it's not having such an impact on me. I'm completely energized by my work. And part of that is scrapping this whole notion of what so many people think about empathy. Um, to be clear for the listeners or viewers, um, sometimes you hear one word and then you think the polar opposite. Not being empathic doesn't mean being the exact opposite, like being a jerk. but but what I'll tell you is that ever since I stopped being so empathic with people in my professional work, people have gotten dramatically better, dramatically quicker.
Because you're clear on the outcome there. You're not on the same suffering train, so to speak, as we were talking about. This is just purely for me to know, like, is there anything that you can share with me about like those techniques that you use to have that higher order of understanding or like presence while you're listening to somebody? Like, is there anything actionable that I could try, that you think would be useful in that sense?
Ooh, boy, there's a lot to that.
Well, give
I
me
mean,
something that maybe comes to the top of that list, perhaps.
yeah, let me think on that because when we train on this, it's long trainings. Um, okay, so one thing to listen for here. This will be fun. This will be fun.
All
Let's
right,
do.
let's do it.
Describe your childhood bedroom to me.
Well, I grew up in India at first, and I was in the same room when I slept at night as my parents. And for me, that room was everything. We hung out in there, we played in there, we ate there sometimes, And to me, that was just a place of kind of coming together and spending time. And then also, of course, growing up and sleeping. And then once I moved here, that changed a little bit. I got my own room, but that's what I remember at least. I remember a lot of family time.
And then your first room here, describe that one.
It was me and my brother. We shared the same bedroom. We had, separate beds, of course, and we were most of the time, spending only sleeping amount of time there, maybe playing a little bit. But you got to have, more time outside of the bedroom, and really only came to it when we were sleeping.
Okay, so there you go. Now, what did I just learn about you? Because I could tell you what, I could care less about what your answer was. You could have told me that the bedroom was like a mansion. You could have told me that the bedroom was this big, had all black walls and pictures of serial killers on it. I'm not listening to that. I'm listening to, believe it or not, for how you interpret the world and how you relate and take in information and learn.
Mm,
Really resonate. And one of the things I just learned from that, so the answer doesn't so much matter. But one of the things I just learned from that is one of the ways that you can really like synthesize and take things in and understand and get things is like kinesthetically, like through feeling.
that's very true. I'm a kinesthetic learner.
Boom, there you go. Right. So I just got that. Now, what happened there is one example of higher order listening. Most people are going to listen to you for the content. Is he saying that the walls are black and there's pictures of serial killers?
Mm.
Or is he saying, I'm not listening to the content, I'm listening to how you process information through sensory systems?
And what kind of labels do you use to define your environment, perhaps even? Is
Oh,
that,
yeah.
you know, like
Yeah.
when you ask me about a memory, I'm automatically figuring out like what do I remember, what significance stood out in those moments, right? And you're probably listening to some of those descriptions.
Well, and I didn't even ask you for a memory. I asked you, the specific cue was describe your childhood bedroom. That
Mm,
was the cue. So there's no leading in
that's a
that.
good point. Wow.
There's no leading in it. So I don't say, what did your bedroom look like? I'm leading you to think visually. I don't say, what did your bedroom feel like? I'm leading you to experience kinesthetic. No leading. Describe your childhood bedroom. Then I listen if you're processing visually, auditorily, kinesthetically.
Mm.
I get that. Everyone else out there is going to be listening to the content. Hey, was his bedroom blue or black or pink? I don't care. I'm not listening to that. I'm going to get information that is so much more useful and will have relevance. So there's a whole lot to that, but I'm glad to see. I think it's really resonating with you.
No, it is, and I think I'm starting to see. It's almost like when they say read between the lines. You're almost reading between the statements, so to speak, as to what the person is describing. And I think attentive listening is that. Is like looking at visual cues and sort of like facial recognition a little bit. We're intuitively understanding things when we see someone's facial expressions that might not even be spoken about, right? Like there's certain things that we pick up on. So that's so interesting and fascinating to me that you have a method that speaks to that. And probably for this segment, do you want to talk a little bit about like how people can sign up or be a part of that training if they wanted to learn about this, and where would they go and find that?
Oh, yeah, thank you. So you can go to best place to go to two places. You can go to my website, which is michaelcortina.com.
Great
Michael,
website, by the way.
oh, thanks, appreciate it. Michael, michaelcortina.com. And I spend quite a bit of time on LinkedIn, so you can always find me on LinkedIn as well. And I'd be happy to talk about master classes and trainings. What I gave you is it's a cool piece. It's a tip of the iceberg. There is so much. It'd blow your mind what you could do with language and listening. I'll have a room full of helping professionals, coaches, therapists, counselors, psychiatrists, nurses, clergy. I'll have a room full of helping professionals, and I'll talk to them how, hey, I'm going to cover with you guys a little bit how to listen. Yeah, like we don't know how to listen. We've been in the help. Oh no, your world's about to get rocked. You wouldn't believe how much more there is to listening. I gave you an example just there.
Right.
But listening, there's so much to that, and it gets thrown around generically. Um, all I could do is chuckle sometimes. It is way deep, dude.
You see in the rabbit hole and how deep it goes, and I think for most people we're not a critically thinking society, and that troubles me, and it's partly why I've set out to be different. I've always wanted to be sort of not like everybody else in that sense. It's like I always done stuff that people thought was weird, but at the same time, to me, that was like carving my own path, and like having conversations like this is an avenue of growth in that direction, right? Like so. I don't want to quite end with you just yet. I have a couple more things I'd like to ask you. I'm pretty sure I can talk to you like for like all day because there's just so many things that I'd like to know. But I'd be curious, like if we could talk a little bit about like the trauma that's being created in people's lives through current events. Like imagine all the people that thought that they were going out and protesting for change, only to find out that that's something that they got maybe bashed on or even shot at, or violence ensued on them. A lot of younger people, even like they've never seen anything crazy in their life, and now all of a sudden these are happening. These type of events are happening. They're a regular occurrence in the news, and I'm wondering what kind of problems are we creating in our youth and in the generations to come, and kind of like no different than another person's traumatic experience in a different context, but this is very specific to current events. Like what are we shaping our generations to come to be like if their experience out the gate now when they speak up is cancel culture, is physical violence when they want to protest. It's what are we creating? What do you think about that?
I think we're creating an absolute monster. It's you know, I get concerned about that. I think here's the thing. I think I've said this for years and way before any of this mess going on now. I mean, I probably, honestly, probably 2 decades ago, I was saying stuff like this, that news is news because most of the time it's rare. What does that mean? It means I think there's so much more positivity and support and love and peace, and I got your back and you got my back, and I don't care what race it is. Like, oh, I think there's so much more of that, but that's not going to make the news, is it?
Mm,
Not going to make the news when the man helps the elderly woman across the street. It's not going to make the news when, um, Johnny, gives Susie his jacket. It's not going to make the news. It's going to make the news when it's negative, when it's violent, when it's because I think there's so much less of that going on. So that's what gets the attention. That's what gets the airplay, and it's unfortunate because people who maybe don't know better or don't have enough life experience yet, or in combination with being a little bit more shut in now, um, aren't experiencing the fact that most of the time that's not the case. I'm not saying it does,
mm,
but most of the time it's really not. I mean, man, I've been all kinds of places. I've been places where, sometimes my skin color is the only color that's there. I've been places where there's, you know, uh, 99, I've worked in places and had clients and staff members and colleagues. It was 99% black and it's me and we got along just fine. I've been in places where, there's all whites and um, so does some stuff happen? Yes. But you know what? Why aren't we speaking more to what's more prevalent? And I've been out there in the world. I've been to different countries and different places and different settings. And I know a lot of people that have, and a lot of people that I've talked to that say the same thing. And you know what? There's so much love and there's so much good and there's so much peace between humans. And turn on the media, good luck finding that. So I'm really concerned about the impact that that's having because I think I think it's skewed. I think you're seeing
totally. It's just what we're talking about with social media. It's just like it's the same concept. Before it was TV screens, and now it's pocket TVs, right? Like it's the same exact thing. And instead of just getting attention on the news, and they've had to react, to be fair to the news, they've had to react to the ability of everybody being able to publish their own news now. And so they see what the trend is and what people react to, and how much of that is now translated to the mainstream TV media as well.
Yeah.
And so I think it's all kind of part of the same ecosystem of like controlling human behavior through narrative and labeling, and carefully picking words that trigger people to behave a certain way. I think it's really scary yet empowering to me, because I go, well, that's just that much opportunity. Like I tend to be one of the people that will call out the tough stuff, say the things that other people wouldn't point out in a situation, just to make sure. It's like, are you sure you've thought this through entirely? Like, just because you have that belief. It's almost like I like to question people's beliefs, and then speaking of that, I'd be curious as to like what your philosophy about life is. Like, why do you believe we're all here? And what do
Hmm.
you think we're all here for? It's a very big question, but I'm curious what your philosophy of life is.
I think we're here to serve. I think we're here to serve each other, serve one another. At the end of anything, at the end of a product, at the end of a service, at the end of an email, at the end of a text, at the end of an emoji, at the end of a conversation, be it Zoom, be it in person, at the end of anything, almost 99%, leave a little fudge room, the end of anything is another human being. And I think we're here to serve in some capacity. Now, how we serve can look very different for very different people, and it ought to. I mean, there's a lot going on in this world. So how we serve can be different, but I think we're here to serve. Um, yeah,
I like
that's
that. I would agree. I think mine is all like, I think we're here to love. We're here to be peace and love and actualize that more and more. Look at how much of our environment is taken care of by itself. The ocean wave doesn't need help. The planet doesn't need our help to revolve. The sun is here for us. It's the solar panel. We're all solar panels. We need that sun. Otherwise, no life would exist. To me, one of the most profound understandings. It's more of like a story about something that I can't quite explain, and I don't think anybody can. It's like, why does the moon exist? Well, the moon exists because it has no light of its own. It reflects the sun. When that sun goes around the earth at night, on your side of the earth, you have no idea if that sun is actually around the corner. The only way that you know is because of that moon reflecting at night. Whatever created this thought it through to a point. It's just an idea. Thought it through to a point to give you that sense of comfort, that love. That look, tomorrow is around the corner. It's coming. The moon's there. It's reflecting you the sun. Because without it, the earth would freeze over in 18 hours. We'd all be done.
I like that. I
And
like,
it's like our existence is so big and so massive that we can't possibly comprehend it, being the little humans that we are.
there you go.
So like for me, it's like, yeah, you're here to realize that you're love, because something loves you enough to give you that next heartbeat. Each exhale is a reminder that you're loved, because you don't know when the last one is going to be.
I really like it. I dig it.
Thanks, man. I've had a really good conversation with you, honestly, and I don't really even know if I want to end it, but we're probably going to have to at this point, because you probably have other things to do. I'm curious if there's anything else you'd like to share with me or ask me or talk about before we go.
Wow. I don't. I'm so engrossed in the moment. Each moment that nothing comes to mind. I've just really been enjoying this conversation the whole way through, and staying very present with it. So yeah, I thank you for that. I appreciate the talk.
Thanks, Michael. I likewise. It's been very informative, to say the least. It's been eye-opening, and like you said, we were very present with each other, and I think that's what I want more and more of for everybody. And I do believe podcasting is the way to go, because in a culture where we're basically told not to talk, we need to talk. We all need to talk to each other, right? We want to communicate, and let's do that. Let's find a way that you can do it safely via Zoom, like we are, sitting on literally two different sides of the United States,
Right.
and still being able to communicate just as well as if we were in the same room. So I urge everybody to do that, and I think perhaps something you should consider as well. If you ever want to start the Michael podcast, Michael Cortina podcast or something, I'm happy to help you. Blossom Media is here for you if you ever need us. So keep that in mind. And, with that said, Michael, again, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time and, agreeing to come on this. I don't know how many people this will touch, but it touched me, and that's good enough for me. So I thank you for it. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.